Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 70 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. Today's tip comes from special guest, Dr. Melissa Bird. Know your fire.
So the one actionable tip I have for people to be more effective is if you are speaking about something that makes you feel passionate, talking to 5 or 5,000 people will be really easy. So know the thing that lights you on fire. Be really clear on what your jam is and be excited about that thing, because when you speak from that space, you're unstoppable.
You know, the best and most powerful tips really are that simple. So how do you figure out what your fire is if you don't know? Take 15 minutes to yourself, maybe in a quiet spot at home or in a neighborhood coffee shop. You know, grab a pen and a paper. I find that pen and paper actually works best for this. And write down just a messy list of things that light you up. If you're not sure where to start, ask yourself these 4 questions. What do you talk about with friends? What do you post about most on social media? What angers you the most in the news? And what is your go-to advice for folks who come to you asking for advice? Just do it quickly and don't censor yourself. Odds are, by the time you're done, the things that fire you up are already on that list. Want to keep work and personal stuff separate? That's fine. You can do the same exercise, but simply add "at work" to the end of those questions. You may be surprised at the list, but those are the things that fire you up. Stick around. And after the break, we'll talk more with Dr. Bird about her story, discovering the power of her voice and the keys to her success as a speaker. Welcome back. I had a great chat with Dr. Melissa Bird last week about her story and her passions. You can find the links that we talk about today over at 2minutetalktips.com/birdgirl. Melissa Bird has a PhD and an MSW. She is a passionate feminist whose education in social work has led to a career advocating for children, women, and their families. She is a fierce believer in social justice advocacy and preparing women for leadership roles in politics. She has a wealth of experience working with policymakers, community leaders, and other stakeholders to improve access to reproductive health care for women, men, and teens. As a writer, professor, and fiery public speaker, Dr. Bird creates the genesis for a new brand of leadership. Her words awaken revolutionaries, trailblazers, and powerful innovators in the quest for justice. When she's not building her public speaking empire, she can be found reading trashy novels, drinking fine whiskey, and playing mom to 3 delicious humans, and loving her punk rock scientist, James Thomas Kelly. I met Melissa through Melanie Childers, who you heard a few weeks back in episode 68. You can check out that episode in 2minutetalktips.com/Melanie. Melissa and I had a great chat that went in directions neither of us had really expected. Now I'm thinking about ways to incorporate Facebook Live into the things that I do with 2-Minute Talk Tips. Melissa talks a lot about the importance of saying the things that you need to say. And for all the ills we associate with Twitter, Facebook, and social media, there has never been a better time or a better opportunity to share your voice with the world. So let's meet Melissa. So, Melissa, thank you for joining us this week on 2-Minute Talk Tips.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I really love the energy you bring here.
Well, I am all about energy.
So, how did you get into public speaking and start channeling that energy towards the stage?
Well, my road to public speaking is not without its complications. So I was asked to speak actually at a rally back in Utah ages ago now, about they were trying to pass an adoption law that said that gay and lesbian people couldn't foster parent or adopt. And someone asked me to come and speak in opposition to the bill to a rally that they were having at the Capitol. And I'd never spoken in that capacity so publicly before, especially about anything controversial in my life. And I'd done some workshops and some trainings, but those were smaller groups of people, and I was much more comfortable training like 30 or 40 people. And that didn't feel so much like public speaking to me, even though now I recognize that it really actually is public speaking. But I had never spoken in that capacity. And I remember I was shaking so badly, and I had my notes, but I couldn't, I didn't have a podium to put them down on. And so my papers were just shaking. And I remember thinking, nobody is going to take me seriously after this because I was so nervous. And my biggest fear was that I would end up just faltering over my words, but I actually got a standing ovation. And so I was like, I'm really pretty good at this. Maybe I should keep doing it. And I just kept inserting myself into situations and spaces where when people needed somebody to talk, I would talk.
That's really interesting how that happens and how that comes up. I think there's a couple of things that really jump out about what you talk about there. First of all, the idea that being worried that folks aren't going to take you seriously. I think that's one of the things you see a lot of nervous speakers talk about. One of the things I have found, and that really is emphasized there, is that ultimately it's not about you. It's about your message, and it's about the story that you can bring. They're not focused on the shaking papers.
Yeah, that's something that I really have really started to hone in on personally, is that now I have a system where I have a binder and I write my speeches ahead of time and I print them out really large, and they're still word for word because that's just how I memorize things, but I don't read off of them as much as I used to. But I really realized that if I was organized enough and I practiced and I knew I wanted to say ahead of time, that the nervousness started to diminish and I was able to speak my story in a much more passionate way if I wasn't worried about people thinking that I was shaking. Because I still, to this day, it doesn't matter if I'm talking to 5 people or 5,000 people, my hands still shake when I speak. And so, but I've noticed if I am talking and I'm animated and excited enough and engaging enough, it doesn't matter. Nobody's noticing that I'm shaking or that my voice is shaking because I'm impassioned about what I'm saying.
So what is it about obviously dealing with those nerves and dealing with all of this, that it's easier often to just not get up on stage and present your views in other ways? But what is it about speaking in front of a group that actually appeals to you?
I absolutely love lighting people on fire. I love getting people excited about something. I love helping nonprofit organizations raise money through the power of my words and my speaking. I love having people sit in an audience and nod their heads like, yes, I'm totally with her. Yes. I love presenting complicated, controversial information in a way that actually resonates with the gamut of people. So that runs the room. So even if there are people that may or may not be with me on an issue, I love talking about complicated, difficult issues and telling difficult, complicated stories so that people can at least start to move more to the middle about things that seem so polarized in this country. And there's so much feedback you can get from a room when you're talking. And if you are engaged and excited and passionate, then people become engaged and excited and passionate right back. And that's what I love about it.
That sort of mutual energy that builds and feeds on itself in the community.
Yes.
And I think you touch on something really key there that gets overlooked a lot in an era of Twitter and sound bites. And I love Twitter and it's a great tool, but it definitely has its issues there. But in that you're talking about a lot of these controversial issues that are complicated and that they're not simple, and that getting up on the stage allows you to explore some of the complications and nuances and to really build a broader experience that is about, maybe moving people in a direction, even if they don't come to full agreement.
Yeah, I think the thing, and I love Twitter too. Listen, I am a huge fan of Twitter, mostly because it's connected me to this community of people that I never would have known otherwise. And that's why I really, really love Twitter. But I also I've recognized over the course of the last year, especially, how important it is for us to have nuanced conversations about things that are happening in our local communities and even at a state and federal level. So there are so many opportunities for me to engage a room through my speaking to really address some of those nuances and see where people are at and help them get to a space where they feel comfortable speaking their own truth and engaging in their own way. And I think that's why I love getting up in a room so much. There is something so powerful about that kinetic energy in a room when people are getting fired up and excited about something that I love about getting on a stage and doing. I used to joke when I would get on stage, I was like, oh, now you've given me a microphone, you're in trouble. No, but I love having a platform to talk. And it has not always been that way, Bill.
Right. You know, I think we've all made that joking comment about now you're in trouble that I have the microphone. That's sort of in that public speaker staple, along with the hi, welcome. We've got just a few minutes, but don't worry, I've only got 547 slides today.
Oh, PowerPoint.
You know, so obviously you've had a lot of experience in working through your nerves since getting on stage. Have you always had to deal with nerves in this way?
I really have. So, one of my I remember very early on in my career as a lobbyist, I was getting interviewed on the news all the time. And I got a phone call I grew up in a small town in Utah. That's not so small anymore. I grew up in Park City, Utah, and it's not so small anymore, but it was back then. And my speech and debate / English teacher / newspaper editor, right? He was all the things, right?
Right.
Mr. Maddox was his name. And he called me at my office one day and he said, hey, Missy, Missy Bird, this is Mr. Maddox. And I was like, oh, hey, Mr. Maddox, what's happening? And he said, well, I just saw your television interview on the news, and I just really wanted to say to you, you've really come a long way since you were in my speech and debate class. And I was like, I really have. And he said, of all my students, I never would have seen you doing all this public speaking that you're doing. And he said, do you remember how I used to have to hand you a garbage can so you could throw up right before you would give your speech? And then you'd give your speech and leave the room with the garbage can to go clean yourself up. And I was like, I sure do. And here I was in high school speaking to people I'd grown up with. I'd known them my whole teenage life. I'm in a room with 15 people that I've known forever. Sure. And I could not speak without literally getting physically ill. But the best part about that was Mr. Maddox never gave up on me, right? Like he always was like, you have to get up there no matter what. You have to get the grade. You have to get up and speak. You're taking this class. You have to take this class. You have to talk in front of people. And I think for me, getting over my nerves was part of him recognizing that we all have the ability to do this if we speak from a place of something that's important to us. And I think that's something that I've carried with me this whole time. And I still, right before I get on stage, sort of think about Mr. Maddox. He ended up dying of cancer a couple of years ago, very early. He was really young, and it was really devastating to all of us as a community because he was still teaching at Park City High. Mm-hmm. And so I know how much he's affected many of us in our careers in speaking and being up on a stage. And he is he's a true testament to what a good teacher and mentor when it comes to public speaking can do for your career. Because I still think of him every time I put a mic in front of my face. I'm like, oh, he'd be so proud.
Right. He sounds like he's really someone who, was able to recognize that, you had to do this, and he was willing to provide whatever tools he could, even if that was an empty trash can,
Yep.
so that you would be able to go ahead and do it.
Yep.
I think it's also interesting how those high school coaches and when I was in high school, we had Mr. Quigley was the history teacher who launched our speech program in my school, and interestingly enough, he also passed away fairly young. I think he was in his early 40s. Some heart stuff. What I think is also really interesting is that he never became Andrew or Andy to me. He was always going to be Mr. Quigley.
Yes.
Those early names just stick with you.
Yep. It's always Mr. Maddox.
Right. So that had its impact. That gave you some of the key tools to go ahead and get started, to the point where you don't need those trash cans today. You're able to work with the binder and these other tools for preparing yourself. How much of a central part of your life today is speaking and getting up on that stage?
So it's basically my entire career. So like I said earlier, I've worked for nonprofits. I've run nonprofits. I have been intentionally placed myself and applied for jobs and situations where I would be a public face and a public speaker and a public figure. And then I finished my PhD last year in 2017.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I decided that in addition to teaching, I wanted to create my business, Bird Girl Industries, because I am my own industry, and really start using my passion for helping women in particular really get excited about engaging in community activism and community action, and place myself on stages throughout the country where I could talk to women in particular, but all different kinds of groups, about engaging in social justice action and activism on their own terms, and really help them figure out how to tap into their passion to make a difference in their own communities. And so that is what I've been doing professionally for the last year, is going around and speaking at conferences and doing workshops in communities all over the country. From Holyoke, Massachusetts to Bloomington, Indiana, to even here in Corvallis, Oregon, to talk to women about engaging in passion. And I got to speak to a group of really incredible social workers that they do perinatal social work. And I was their plenary speaker, their closing speaker. And it was just so awesome to sit in a room with all of these people who are doing such phenomenal work helping babies. And how, there's so many different aspects to social work that I love as a social worker, that I can take my skills as an advocate and someone who engages in policy making and speak about those things and teach other people to do them, I think is really awesome. And I love it. I love speaking at large conferences and small conferences. And there is no group too large or too small, because there is nothing I adore more than getting on a stage.
A lot of people get hung up on talking to groups because it's going to be hundreds or potentially thousands of people there. In my experience, it's once you actually get out there, it's those groups of 15 to 20 to 30 people that can be more intimidating than the group of 1,000 people, because you can see each of those individual people in the smaller group than on the large stage, where often you can't see anyone because of the lights, and an entire huge audience can sort of blur together.
Yeah, I remember. So I spoke at a rally here in Corvallis, and I asked the organizers, I said, well, how many people are you expecting? And they said, I don't know. There could be like 500 to 1,000. We don't know. And I remember looking out, getting up on the dais and on the stage that they'd created in the gazebo, and looking out. And I was like, there are like 4,000 people here. And I remember thinking, I only have to focus on the ones in the front and yell as loud as possible to hit the ones in the back, because their sound system was so bad. I had to project my voice. And clearly from talking to me, Bill,
right.
Me projecting is not a problem. I'm really good at it. Mm-hmm. And I actually, to this day, will be walking downtown and people in town will be like, you're the only speaker I heard from that day. Nice job. But but it is, I think, a little more, I used to think the opposite is also true, right? Like I used to think that it would be much more complicated to speak to 3,000 people than 300 people or whatever. But I much prefer a larger crowd because it's not as intimidating as it is when you're speaking to those intimate people. And the other thing too that I think is really important for people who want to speak or who are thinking about speaking is that I was getting frustrated early on last year when I started my business because nobody was hiring me. So I was pitching, but I wasn't getting the jobs. And I was talking to my coach and I said to her, I'm not getting any gigs and I'm getting frustrated. And she said, well, why don't you just create your own stage? And so I started doing Facebook Lives on Monday and Fridays. And I am creating an audience that way. And it's taken a long time and a lot of commitment on my part. But I now have months and months of me speaking live on Facebook. And I have people coming in from all over the place now to watch my Facebook Lives. And I never would have had that kind of reach had I just tried to keep doing the same old thing to speak my words and speak my truth. And it's not a stage, but it is helping me practice the things that resonate and don't with people. And so that's been a really creative way that I've gotten my voice out there so that I have content so that people who do want to hire me to speak can just look at anything I've produced over the last, 6 months and go, wow, we want her to come and talk about that, So there's lots of creative ways to talk too. But I prefer a larger audience.
Sure. That's really interesting. You talk about Facebook Live. It's amazing how that space has grown to give people that forum to be able to talk, to share their views with a very low barrier to entry. If you've got a computer, if you've got a smartphone with a camera and an internet connection, you can start doing Facebook Lives and start producing content. And it becomes a great way to not only build an audience, to get comfortable with an audience, but as you mentioned, to go ahead and produce this library of content that people can then refer back to. And that also gives you an opportunity to go ahead and further refine your own message.
Sure. It has surprised me at how valuable of a tool it has been for me when it comes to speaking and talking. And I think it's a wonderful resource, especially for people who might be nervous or unsure about what it is what point they're trying to get across. It's a great opportunity to just it's sort of like sitting in your own living room, basically, and having a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What I also think is interesting too, that whole sitting in your living room and have that conversation, it sort of gives you an opportunity to work out your thoughts and figure out what it is you're thinking and what it is you want to say. And people are more open to that since it does start in that live context rather than expecting something to be a more finished or more complete type of production.
I think for many of us that want to speak about things that we're really passionate about, especially right now, it has given us this incredible platform to really take a deep breath and go, okay, I really want to talk about the things that have happened in the last week, the last month, the last 6 months, whatever it is, in a really open way to get immediate feedback too. I mean, I think that's the other thing that's so fascinating about doing a Facebook Live as a tool to hone in on your public speaking skills is, you get immediate feedback from people on your Facebook Live. And if they don't like some of the stuff you're saying, you're going to know right away. And so, especially if you're talking about more controversial things, like Sure. You're going to know immediately, even if those people are your friends. Like I've even noticed that people that I've known for a long time get on there and they start fighting, and it's kind of funny.
Yeah, you mean the internet doesn't just provide an never-ending source of positive comments?
Oh, they call it feedback.
Yeah.
So you get immediate response too, which I have found has actually helped me hone my message better. It's really created an opportunity for me when I do get ready to do my paid public speaking gigs. I now have an opportunity to really get real clear on my message before I get on that stage based on the feedback that I get.
Because if you can build a message that can survive Facebook comments or internet comments. You can build a message that can survive anywhere.
That is the honest to God truth.
So you've talked about how a lot of your focus in your work is working specifically with women. What have you found is the difference between coaching men and women when it comes to speaking or sharing their views? And what are the specific skills that you feel you have to coach many women with that maybe you haven't seen the need to coach men with?
So the number one thing I think is different is that women need permission to speak their truth. So men will just get on a stage and talk because they're like, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. Even if they don't know what they're talking about, they have the ability to just get on the stage and be like, yeah, sure, I'll tell you about that. I have no idea what that is, but I'm going to get up here and do it anyway. Women just are hardwired to need permission to talk and then permission to speak their absolute truth. And for many of us, that's because we have been attacked, because we have had experiences in our own life where we have been told that our story is not valid. For many of us, we have dealt with a whole slew of experiences where, our story is invalid. And we are now starting to insert ourselves in many different spaces where we never would have before. And so when I'm coaching women, it's all about giving them permission to say that thing that they want to say. And it doesn't matter what their background is. It doesn't matter where they fall on the political spectrum, on the religious spectrum, on the social justice spectrum. It doesn't matter where they fall. Every single woman that I have worked with has needed some sort of permission to say, well, this is how I feel, and this is my truth, and this is what I think, and this is what I know as an expert in whatever field they're in. And they have always needed that permission to do that. And I think that's the major difference. Men they don't even, and if you think you need to give them permission, they take offense. So I think that's the biggest difference.
That's something I've been hearing a lot lately as I've listened to other coaches who talk about some of those differences, feeling that it's okay to actually come out and say what needs to be said.
Yeah.
One aspect of that, and one of the things you coach on a lot, is the idea of finding your voice. What does that mean?
So for a great many of us, we have a story in our head. We know what we want it to look like, but we have a difficult time giving voice to it. So we're willing to maybe have that conversation with our kids or our partners or our best friends in the world, or maybe our colleagues at work, the people we volunteer with, the people that we know. But we have a hard time voicing and shouting it out from the rooftops about what we want to talk about and what makes us feel passionate and lights us on fire. Finding your voice is all about really tapping into the core of who you are and what lights you on fire to really engage in action in your community. So to kind of push past your fear of speaking imperfectly and just saying what you have to say. Because a lot of times, and I think this is especially relevant with what's happening on social media, kind of get back to that a little bit. Mm-hmm. We get told we're not engaging in action in the right way. So one of the things that I'm really hopeful for is that for women in particular who want to change the world, and men too, you have something to say. Don't be afraid of having it be perfect. Just get out and say it. So if you know that you want to help the homeless in your community, and you have an idea, and you don't know if it's going to resonate with people or not, but you have this idea, then figure out a way to communicate that idea to the people who are critical to making that happen. Whether it's service providers or people in your faith-based community or your neighbors or elected officials, being willing to be imperfect when you speak your voice and speak your truth is critical to us changing our communities and making a difference in our lives. And I have seen that happen in the people that I've worked with. It's just about sort of gaining that confidence to influence and impact change in our communities by being willing to do it in an imperfect way, but an authentic way that reflects our voice and who we are as people.
It calls to mind one of the lessons that I've been trying to remind myself of over the last couple of months, and that's the whole theme that done is better than perfect. Yes. If you wait until everything is just right and just perfect, you're never going to get it done, and you're never going to get the results you need. You just need to start creating, start building, start talking.
Yes. Yep.
And it can take some time. This is going to be, I believe, episode 70 of this podcast. It wasn't until I hit about the early 40s that I felt something click in the series of episodes where I felt like I was now suddenly speaking with an authentic voice. It actually just sort of took the time to get there and actually go ahead and do it in order to be able to get to the point where I felt I was there.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that is really, really important to remember is that the more you do it, the more you write about it, the more you speak about it, the more you practice it, the easier it gets, and the more you're willing to just keep going and not give up, right? On getting your message out and doing the things that you feel really called to do. So one of the things that I also do is I carry around a book with me all the time, like a little journal or a little notebook where I write my ideas down about things that I want to talk about and things that I really want to engage in. And so I have those to refer back to so I don't forget them, because let's just be honest, I'm in my 40s. I'm getting older. I forget stuff all the time. And so my mom promised.
There's a lot of stuff floating around in your head by this point.
Listen, my head is very busy all the time. I've got a lot of ideas. My eyes are going and I forget things. So I really find that writing down the things I want to talk about, like if I have a random idea or a random thought pop into my head, no matter where I am, I write it down. And then I can go back and create a whole entire speech around that, or a whole entire Facebook Live around that, or sort of create that platform. And is it perfect? No. Usually not. Usually it's super imperfect. And usually I'm just speaking about stuff that I'm just really excited about. But it doesn't matter because I'm speaking from my gut and my soul and my heart. And when if you are speaking about something that makes you feel passionate, it doesn't matter if it's 5 or 5,000 people. It's really easy because you're tapped in and you know what you're talking about. And it sort of shifts the paradigm from intimidating to exciting.
And another great thing to talk about in terms of using those things for Facebook Live and being able to have that stuff and have that platform to be able to work through that. It almost seems like, as somebody who really wants to get into this and wants to start exercising those muscles more, even sort of making a personal commitment to do, something like a Facebook Live every Tuesday at such and such time, or whatever it is, to have that platform that you can go out and go ahead and just force yourself to start creating, even if you start with nothing, to just go ahead and practice and get it done.
Yeah. And it's not always perfect. Like there's not that sometimes I'm not getting on right at noon, or I have an emergency with one of my kids come up and I think, life happens, right?
Right.
It's not always the perfect execution of my vision, but that doesn't mean I stop. And I think that's been the one thing that has led so much to my successes as of late, is that I never, ever gave up, even when it felt daunting and intimidating and like, I just can't do this anymore. I have never given up on wanting to speak the things that I hold true and dear right now. There have been many times when I have thought, I can't do this anymore. Nobody's watching my Facebook Lives. And then I'll record this off the cuff ridiculous thing that I think is just silly. And I get 1,000 people watching it. And I'm like, I don't even understand. That was I did not even mean for that to do anything. It's always the ones that I don't, the speeches and the talks that I don't expect to be anything are the ones that go viral every single time.
It really is funny how that happens. I started encountering that lesson, maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, back in my days when I was blogging. Where I'd plan out some of these really what I thought was well-crafted posts and stories about something in the news, or, a 5,000 word book review, and, traffic, and there's no response. It's like, okay, whatever. It's not the primary reason I was doing this. And then one time I posted a picture of just this coffee mug I had with all of these pens in it. And I just said, I have too many pens. And that post just took off.
Isn't it funny? Like, people are so fickle about their blog posts. It's like, yeah. And people are it's really interesting what resonates with people and what doesn't. And so one of the things I really challenged myself to do is just fall back on the thing I coach people on. If you have the confidence and the tools to take action, and you are willing to do it without it being perfect, and you're willing to just frame your story and speak your voice and speak your truth, it goes. And it's unbelievable how it goes. And so if you're just willing to do it in that super imperfect way, each one of us is unstoppable in that. The thing that I have found most fascinating in the last several months is how my willingness to engage in that is impacting other people. And I get random messages from people all the time that say, just keep doing what you're doing because we're listening to you and we hear you. And you may not know it, but you are impacting my life. You impact my life every single day. And it's little tiny things, and because I'm just keep putting it out there, Bill, that are coming back. And it's really, really amazing. It's awesome.
Ultimately, we all just want to be heard.
Yeah.
So what is the toughest lesson that your students have to learn?
I think the hardest thing that my students have to learn, whether it's my students in a college classroom or my coaching clients or the people that I'm talking to, is that it's okay not to have all the answers. And they don't like that because, and this was a lesson I learned early on in my career, training volunteers to work with abused, neglected kids. So I used to work for the CASA program in Utah. And I used to train volunteers, and it was my first big girl job. And so, of course, I'm in my early 20s, and I think I know all the things. And I really know nothing. Let's be really clear. Sure. I have now figured that out now that I'm in my 40s. I'm like, I knew nothing.
Every year you realize you know less and less. You
really do. And I had a volunteer ask a question, and I BS'd my way through the answer. And because I thought if I admit I don't know, then I'm going to get fired. Like, I didn't know, right? I'm young. I'm naive. I have no idea what I'm doing, basically. And I had someone in that group come up to me and say, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know the answer, but I'll get back to you and let you know. I will find the answer for you. And if I can't find it, we'll find a way to find it. And that's the greatest piece of advice anybody ever gave me. Number one, it was instrumental in my career as a lobbyist. Because if I didn't have the answer for an elected official, when I admitted I didn't have the answer, they were like, wow, thanks for not, creating some ridiculous argument about why you didn't have the answer. I really appreciate that. So it gave me the ability to have a more authentic voice. And I think that's what's critical for my students and for my clients that I work with. When you are engaging in public speaking, or when you're engaging in social justice action, if you don't have the answer, it's totally okay. We don't have to know the answer, but we do have to be willing to figure out how to get people the information that we want them to have. And if we can do that, we're going to shift the way we talk about everything in this country. And that's the hardest thing for people to learn is not everybody, I'm not an expert in everything, but I know what I am an expert in, and I'm damn good at it. And if I don't, I also know how to connect people to the experts. So, I don't know a lot about transportation or the environment, but I know people who do, and I am more than happy to get that information to other people.
What's really awesome about that is that it also aligns with a lot of the other things that, longtime members have been hearing me talk about in terms of how you manage Q&A. And you talk about doing that in a social media context and working with elected officials. It's one of those things that really applies whenever you're speaking or whenever you've got a stage and people ask you something you don't know. Is be authentic, acknowledge it, and make the commitment to solve the problem.
Yeah, it's okay to say, I don't know. Like we've created, and I think that the land of Twitter has really done this. We have created an entire nation that is now built upon some prerequisite that everything all of the time. I don't know diddly about a lot of things, but I'm curious enough to find them out. And I'm also really invested in not repeating history. And so I really also feel like part of this is understanding historical context of why things are the way they are. I saw a tweet the other day talking about the Supreme Court and how you can't impeach somebody on the Supreme Court. Well, there's a reason. There's a whole entire structure around the Supreme Court. Don't start debating the Supreme Court until you understand the Supreme Court.
Right.
I can barely scratch the surface of why this is the way it is. But I know enough to be dangerous, and I also know enough to connect the dots for other people and to connect them to the experts who do know more, if that's the thing that they're interested in. And when it comes to public speaking, we are being given a privileged platform to talk. And people will listen to us. And we're the experts in the room. And sort of getting over this notion that we're not, when we're up on that stage or when we're leading a room in some sort of conversation, we have to know what we don't know so that we can be humble enough to connect people to the people that do.
So if folks want to work with you or engage with you on social media, where should they go?
So the best way to work with me is to connect with me on my website. And that is at www.birdgirlindustries.com. Bird, like the thing that flies. And all of my information is on there. People can also connect to my Facebook Lives Mondays and Fridays by following me on Facebook at birdgirl1001. And I'm actually on Twitter and Instagram at birdgirl1001.
Yay, consistent branding is awesome.
Well, I can't remember a lot of things. So.
And they can also find all of those links over at 2minutetalktips.com/birdgirl. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fantastic to meet you.
That was a really fun chat. I like what she says about just getting out there and starting, about giving yourself permission to share your voice with the world. So what do you think? Let us know over in the comments at 2minutetalktips.com/birdgirl. Or if you'd like to share your literal voice, go ahead and give us a call at 650-TALK-TIP. That's 650-825-5847. To share this episode on social media or with someone else who may find it interesting, simply use the link 2minutetalktips.com/birdgirl. To learn more about Melissa or potentially work with her, head on over to birdgirlindustries.com. Make sure you speak about the topics that light you on fire. And as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.